Ukraine claims to have recaptured 20 square kilometers of land around Bakhmut. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center on Wednesday morning, May 17, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said Ukrainian forces had recaptured about 20 square kilometers of territory around the eastern city of Bakhmut in the past year. Recently, she said Russian forces were still entering the city of Bakhmut itself and fierce fighting continued. The enemy is still making a little advance into Bakhmut itself, completely destroying the city with artillery, she said. In addition, the invaders also brought in professional paratrooper units. The heavyweight battles continued with mixed results. In the current situation, our troops are trying their best and more. The defense of Bakhmut that lasted for many months and made progress in certain areas is due to the strength of our fighters and the high level of professionalism of the defense command. I will remind you that the enemy has the advantage in terms of number of people and weapons. At the same time, thanks to the actions of our army, the invaders have not been able to carry out their plans in the direction of Bakhmut since last summer. 2. Ukrainian Defense Intelligence says Russia's offensive potential is exhausted. Russia's offensive action potential has been completely exhausted, while its defensive capabilities remain strong. The director of the General Intelligence Service of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Major General Kirilo Budanov, made the above stance in an interview with the program Rizny Lyady. Russia's offensive potential has been completely exhausted, but now they still have significant defensive potential. That's right. They have built a large, accurate and strong defense. But this is no longer a Russian army that can carry out serious offensive operations, Budanov said. He noted that Russia is directly involved in hostilities on Ukrainian territory with a military force of nearly 370,000 people as well as about 20,000 National Guardsmen and about 7,000 members of various paramilitary units. As previously reported by Ukrinform, military intelligence spokesman Andriy Yusov stated that Russia is turning to a defensive posture along the entire front, adding that the enemy is currently incapable of carrying out efforts. Large-scale attack. 3. Russia used more ammunition to overwhelm and confuse Ukraine's air defenses. Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Pat Ryder said Russia was using more weapons than usual to overwhelm and confuse Ukraine's air defenses. General Pat Ryder said Russia had launched larger airstrikes from multiple directions at once, targeting command and control centers in Kyiv and other high-value locations. Russia may have begun extensive attacks to force Ukraine to delay its much-anticipated counteroffensive, he said. But Ukraine was able to fend off attacks, intercepting a high percentage of incoming missiles and drones with a multi-layered air defense system provided by Western nations. According to General Pat Ryder, extended strikes could even benefit Ukraine, as Russia increasingly has a limited supply of precision weapons. On Tuesday, Russia attacked with a Kinzhal/Kinzhou/supersonic missile launched from a fighter jet, a Kalibr cruise missile fired from the Black Sea and a land-based Iskander missile, the head of Ukraine's military said. The attack came from the north, south and east. Another official told CNN that the attack may have damaged, but not destroyed, a Patriot system. The U.S. is assessed the extent of the damage. Earlier this month, Ukraine used newly delivered Patriot missiles to intercept a hypersonic Kinzhal/Kinzhou/rocket, marking the first time a U.S.-made missile intercepted a weapon used by Russian President Vladimir Putin claims to be unstoppable. Last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine needed a little more time before starting a counterattack. Fourth, Britain and the Netherlands cooperate to build an international alliance to help Ukraine buy F-16 fighter jets. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte are working to build an international coalition to help Ukraine buy F-16 fighter jets at this pivotal time in the resistance against the war. Putin's aggression, according to a news release from the Prime Minister's office about the leaders' meeting on Tuesday. Prime Minister Sunak and Prime Minister Rutte have agreed that they will work to build an international coalition to provide Ukraine with air combat capabilities, supporting everything from training to purchasing F-16 jets, a spokesman for the Prime Minister's office said after the meeting of Sunak and Rutte at the Council of Europe summit in Iceland. Sunak also reiterated his belief that Ukraine's rightful place is within NATO and that the leaders agreed on the importance of allies providing long-term security assistance to Ukraine to ensure they can prevent future attacks. Ukraine quickly welcomed the news of the international coalition talks. We need the F-16s and I am grateful to our allies for the decision to work in this direction, including our pilot training. In particular, Belgium has confirmed its readiness to train, Andriy Yermak, head of the office of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, said. Speaking in the UK on Monday, Zelensky welcomed new promises of military aid from European leaders, and repeated his request for state-of-the-art fighter jets. Ukraine is hungry for American-made F-16s to help protect its skies, but some of its allies have been reluctant to provide weapons that would allow Kyiv to reach Russian territory. After a visit with the British Prime Minister on Monday, Zelensky hinted that Ukraine was about to receive the F-16, saying that Ukraine and Britain continue to work on the fighter jet alliance, and that we are actively moving forward front. Zelensky also thanked the UK for agreeing to train Ukrainian pilots. 5. Russian Defense Minister denies Ukraine shot down 6 Kinzhal missiles. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu denied that Ukraine shot down up to 6 hypersonic Kinzhal missiles in the early hours of Tuesday. The Russian Federation did not launch as many Kinzhal as reported, Shoigu told Russian state media RIA Novosti. He said the number of intercepts Ukraine claims is 3 times more than the number of missiles we are launching. And they always get the wrong type of missile, Shoigu declared. That's why they didn't hit. Ukraine said it intercepted all 18 Russian missiles launched into the country in the early hours of Tuesday morning, including 6 Kinzhal missiles. In response to the statements of the Russian defense minister, Kyiv exhibited the Kinzhal missiles they had hit. Observers say Russia is facing new humiliation after Ukraine claimed all 6 of Putin's unstoppable Kinzhal missiles had been shot down in Kyiv. 6. President Zelensky's deputy chief of staff said Ukraine did not have enough military equipment to launch a counterattack against Russia. Ihor Zhovkva said his country needed armored vehicles and tanks if it wanted to liberate areas invaded by Moscow. He added that the main purpose of Zelensky's visits to European neighbors including Britain, Germany and Italy in recent days was to ask for additional military packages. Zhovkva told Sky News, "Unfortunately, the level of equipment we have is still not enough to start a counterattack. To start a counterattack, with the result of liberating Ukrainian territories, you need enough artillery and ammunition systems. You need armored vehicles and tanks. We want this counterattack to be as successful as possible. Success will be the liberation of all temporarily occupied regions of Ukraine." 7. A bill banning Russian uranium imports into the United States gained momentum on Tuesday when it was passed by a committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. After Russia invaded Ukraine last year, the U.S. banned Russian oil imports and, along with other Western countries, imposed price ceilings on crude oil and petroleum products exported by Russia by sea, but the U.S. does not ban the import of uranium. "The war in Ukraine has made it clear that we cannot depend on Russian fuel supplies," said Jeff Duncan, the Commission's representative. "It should be a bipartisan, national security goal to remove U.S. industry from Russian uranium imports." A similar bill has been moved to the Energy Committee in the U.S. Senate. Before it becomes law, it will have to be passed by both houses of Congress and signed by President Joe Biden. 8. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will step up calls for the creation of a special court to try Russia for aggression. Speaking ahead of a summit of European leaders in Reykjavik on Tuesday, von der Leyen said Russia's responsibility for the crime of aggression would be a big topic. Earlier this week, she promised to strongly support the creation of a specialized tribunal to bring crimes of Russian aggression to trial. Leaders from across the continent are meeting in Iceland's capital, Iceland, for the Council of Europe summit, only the 4th in the agency's 74-year history. This. Volodymyr Zelensky, Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, Rishi Sunak and von der Leyen delivered speeches later on Tuesday. Russia was expelled from the Council of Europe in March last year following a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Moscow announced its intention to withdraw from the continent's top human rights body a day before its expulsion, after the Council of Europe's parliamentary panel called on Russia to withdraw from the body. 9. The International Relief Committee has called on Russia and Ukraine to extend the grain agreement in the Black Sea, with wider access to many Ukrainian ports. The humanitarian aid charity, IRC for short, said pressure was mounting on food prices, given the situation particularly affecting Eastern Africa. The IRC said extending the deal was important for Ukrainian farmers. The IRC said Ukrainian farmers are still struggling to sell grain due to disruptions in the logistics chain and congestion at seaports. Shashvat Saraf, director of the East Africa Emergency Committee at the IRC, said, "Food shortages in the system and a lack of affordable fertilizers continue to drive prices up, making it difficult for families in countries like Somalia to predict whether they will be able to afford a meal on Sunday. Next day or not. Agricultural production is declining, farmers in Ukraine are struggling to sustain their crops amid intense shelling, while climate change is killing crops in other parts of the world. Any shock to the market could cause major harm with catastrophic spillover effects in countries that are balancing on the brink of famine. The expiration of the Black Sea Grains Initiative has the potential to cause increased levels of hunger and malnutrition, causing further disaster for East Africa. 10. President Zelensky's chief of staff criticized Georgia's decision to resume flights to Russia. Andriy Yermak, chief of staff to Volodymyr Zelensky, has publicly criticized the normalization of some relations between Russia and Georgia. He said, "Georgia allows one more airline to operate direct flights to Russia. The people of Georgia do not stop showing solidarity with Ukraine. We have a common enemy that has been killing Georgians since the 90s and then 2008, and since 2014 it has been killing Ukrainians. For our peoples, this enemy is still present and continues to sow pain. But some seem to be trying to ignore the rocket attacks on Kyiv, the destroyed Marinka, the people killed in Buk, Irpin, Izium, the kidnappings of Ukrainian children. Some seem to have forgotten the tragedy in Gori, Georgia. Perhaps for some, that doesn't seem relevant to them. And interacting with terrorists and murderers is normal. This view is wrong. History will put everything back in its place, humans will surely do the same." 11. Russia's nuclear strategy has been torn to pieces. Newsweek had a report titled "Russia's Nuclear Strategy Has Been Torn to Pieces," which means Russia's nuclear strategy has been torn to pieces. Ukraine says it shot down 6 Kinzhal missiles fired by Russia over Kyiv, demonstrating the effectiveness of Western air defenses and potentially changing calculations about the kind of nuclear risk Moscow could pose. Caused during the war initiated by Putin. 6 Kinzhal Kh-47 missiles launched from MiG-31K aircraft were among 18 missiles Russia fired at Ukraine overnight. 3 cruise missiles were launched from land and 9 more caliber cruise missiles were launched from the Black Sea. The commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Valery Zaluzhnyi, said all was successfully intercepted. Moscow has boasted that no one can stop Kinzhal missiles, which are capable of carrying nuclear warheads and traveling at 10 times the speed of sound. This is not the first Russian weapon that the Russians have called unstoppable and unstoppable, said Serge Sumleny, founder of the Center for European Resilience Initiatives, a German think tank. Ukraine has proven that mass containment is possible. This has serious consequences for the reputation of the Russian military and Russian technology. Normally, the air defense would be saturated in these attacks. We now know that the Ukrainians, with the help of Western equipment, are able to withstand the most serious Russian attack against the most modern Russian weapons that the Russians have ever used against them. Ukraine. In the West, fear of a possible nuclear escalation remains very high, said Sumleny, but we need to seriously rebalance our weights against all risks. Mr. Sumleny added that Kyiv's reported success in intercepting Russian missiles means that Russia's likelihood of a successful nuclear attack should be significantly underestimated than we had previously thought. Since the beginning of the war, Russian state television has frequently mentioned Russia's nuclear capabilities. President Vladimir Putin has hinted at nuclear escalation while mixed messages from Moscow, denying the possibility of such weapons being used, have left world leaders guessing. Guess not. Fabian Hoffman, a doctoral student at the University of Oslo, told Newsweek that Kyiv's ability to intercept missiles in such a multidimensional, time-coordinated, and intense attack shows even if you arming these transports with tactical nuclear warheads, there is still a good chance that they will not land at their designated target. I think this will cause Russian decision-makers to ask some tough questions, and they may feel less secure about the viability and ability to deliver a nuclear arsenal, he said. Surname. While this should not encourage the West to be willing to risk more nuclear escalation, nor do I think a nuclear confrontation would benefit Russia. Ukraine said in early May it had shot down a Kinzhal missile over Kyiv for the first time, using the US-supplied Patriot air defense system. Patriot is one of the advanced air defense systems that NATO countries have provided to Kyiv. The German Iris-T arrived in October and has since shot down more than 60 targets. The Franco-Italian SAMPT also recently arrived. It is not clear if the Patriot system will be able to intercept all the missiles fired during the night of May 15 and 16, but the success of the Ukrainian military shows that it has a reliable defense network that can withstand a bunch of bullets. Serhiy Popko, the head of Kyiv's military administration, described the Patriot as technically exceptional. Putin considers the Kinzhal, the Russian word for dagger, to be Russia's next-generation weapon, despite Moscow's claims of its capabilities, including that it can evade threats. Sophisticated air defense system has been questioned by experts. The Russian Defense Ministry said it fired a Kinzhal missile at an arsenal around Delyatyn, southwestern Ukraine, on March 19, 2022, in the first use of the weapon in combat. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry for comment. 12. Former British Prime Minister says China is the world's biggest threat and Russia has become China's subordinate partner. Newsweek had a report titled "Russia has become China's junior partner," says Britain's former PM, which means the former British Prime Minister says Russia has become China's subordinate partner. According to former British Prime Minister Liz Truss, China is facilitating Russia's invasion of Ukraine despite Beijing's efforts to play a mediator. The war in Ukraine is deepening the link between Moscow and Beijing, which some observers say is setting the stage for a full-fledged Dragon Bear alliance, although much remains to be seen. Difference between Russia and China. I think it's very realistic, Truss told Newsweek of the alliance on the sidelines of the Copenhagen Democracy Summit in the Danish capital on Monday. I think it was President Xi Jinping who described it as unlimited friendship. And it is increasingly clear that Russia is now China's junior partner. And in my view, China is the biggest threat facing the world. Russia has few supporters of its disastrous all-out invasion of Ukraine, the invasion itself just the latest stage in an armed conflict that began with Moscow's seizure of Crimea and part of Donbass in 2014. China has presented itself as a neutral party and a potential mediator, but Beijing's rhetoric is sympathetic to Russian motives. Beijing's refusal to talk to Kyiv for so long while maintaining close contact with the Kremlin underscores what some have described as pro-Russian neutrality. In the context of Russia's economic isolation from the West, China has expanded its energy imports from Russia and exported to Russia dual-use technology, important to Moscow's military machine, that is currently unavailable. Available to Russia from Western sources. So far, Beijing is believed to have refrained from large-scale military assistance to Russia, although reports suggest there have been numerous closed-door military meetings during and after Xi Jinping's recent visit to Russia. Moscow. I believe they are helping Russia deal with the sanctions that Moscow faces, Truss told Newsweek. And it's no coincidence that the war in Ukraine broke out shortly after the Winter Olympics ended. They are a very important part of the same problem we are facing, which is the broader struggle of liberal democracies against escalating authoritarianism, Truss added. You cannot separate those two threats. If Putin succeeds in Ukraine, which I don't think he will, then that will support Xi's efforts in Taiwan. And again, if China succeeds in its ambitions, that will help Russia. These things are inseparable. Truss said she is highly suspicious that China is hedging its bets on Ukraine by refusing Russia's requests for substantial military aid. I also doubt the ability of China to help restore freedom and democracy in Ukraine. We have seen what happened in Hong Kong, we have seen how the 1984 agreement was broken. Effectively ripped off, and freedom and democracy in Hong Kong have been completely destroyed by China. We need to be very careful, Truss said. Of course, in the end, the decision on what to do should be the decision of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Finally, a decision for the Ukrainian people. But we have to be very careful that we don't end up giving China leverage over European security, or indeed leverage over Taiwan. The UK has long been a favorite destination for Russia's dirty money and a playground for the families of top Kremlin figures. The capital was nicknamed Londongrad due to the nefarious wealth-sharing enthusiasm of the Russian oligarchs emerging from the post-Soviet regions. Russian influence reached the pinnacle of the British business and political establishment. In particular, the Conservative Party has been accused of receiving large donations from figures connected to the Kremlin. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for example, was baffled by his own connections with influential Russians and accused him of blocking a landmark report on Russian interference in British politics. Russia's war with Ukraine has resulted in London freezing around $60 billion in Russian assets since the full-blown invasion began on February 24, 2022, although critics say much remains to be done. Must do. Truss conceded that successive British governments had failed to solve the problem. My criticism of what we as the West have done wrong is that for so many years we have essentially facilitated what Putin is doing and provided funding, whether by buying gasoline or other means, for him to carry out these horrible activities, in Ukraine and elsewhere, she said. That's what I think we need to be careful about, that no matter what happens in the future in Russia, we should never allow that kind of regime again. This includes confiscating frozen Russian assets, of the state and of the oligarchs, and using resources to help Ukraine. Truss added, London should not make the same mistake with China, which over the past decade has owned around $180 billion in British assets, including nuclear power plants. What I want us to do is learn from what we didn't do early enough with Russia, with China, Truss said. I am afraid there is still the possibility of facilitating what is happening in China in the way that we have stopped in Russia now. Truss, as foreign minister and for 44 days as prime minister, took a tough stance on China. In an updated UK defence strategy published in March, Sunak described China as an epical challenge, but did not see Beijing as a threat. When asked if she was worried about Sunak's line, Truss replied, I'm concerned that we need to make sure we're going to be as strong as we can in reducing our dependence on China. That is very important. There is always pressure, and this is happening not only in the UK but even in the West. This is happening in Europe and also in the US, from businesses doing business in China, organizations seeking Chinese investment in the UK or other countries. And I think we need to resist that pressure. Truss said British authorities and their allies should be on the lookout for anything from secret police stations to political infiltration. I think China has every means to spread influence. These ongoing disinformation campaigns, inadvertent uses of research, such as Confucius Institute activities, I think there are all kinds of problems that we need to deal with. Newsweek has reached out to the Chinese and Russian foreign ministries by email to request comment.